jump into it. Thanks everyone for joining our session on using Polarity's telemetry data or source analytics data to understand your sources better, understand your data sources and potentially knowledge gaps. And we're going to cover how to set that up as well as some of the benefits. And just in case for folks that are not familiar with Polarity, we're going to start with a short demo, but there is a punchline to the demo in that the goal here is to get data and see data in terms of those source analytics into the system. So as I'm giving the demo, we're actually going to be using that to capture and demonstrate the value, as Joe will flip over and show you the setup and show you how you can get this in your own Polarity instance, or if you don't have Polarity, potentially in the future. Just a few slides, kind of background for those not familiar with Polarity. The main goal is to help with understanding those disparate data sources, those tools, those intel knowledge repositories that are spread across your internal, your external organization, whether that's threat intel feeds, whether it's tools like orchestrations or systems where you're keeping data itself. Polarity helps you connect to that inline across any workflow and leverage and fuse that data into one common view. So here's just kind of a mock-up of what maybe a common view would look like. Here you have all your data sources spread across your enterprise, and we're fusing that data together into one common view, one area to search. We'll show that in action in a moment. This allows both thoroughness as you're doing your work, enabling you to search more things than would be normal or typical. In some cases, run thousands of searches in just a few seconds time, and then speed up your analysis overall. Use cases across our customer base, anything from incident response, security operations, intel, all the way through national security use cases, help desk, and other enablement things. Anywhere where you'd be searching multiple systems is a good key use case for Polarity. On the source analytics side, we're going to dive into mostly this number one here, what data sources overlap the most with my team's workflows. So we're going to really kind of deep dive into that. But there's a lot of other use cases for this telemetry source analytics data too. One of my favorite is actually spotting blind spots, areas in your analysis where you're not informed, where you don't have information, filling in gaps in context potentially. You can also use this data to understand the differences between junior and senior analyst workflows. What are the tools they're using? What are the areas they're searching? Where are they getting their context? How are they informed? You can understand areas of recurring patterns or data and potentially use that for automation or orchestration or setting up, whether that's in an orchestration or SOAR platform or setting up jobs in Polarity to fill in and kind of give that data or those utility functions that you might do on a day-to-day basis in a repetitive task. The source analytics data can help you spot those areas for improvement. And understanding the history of a given indicator. So understanding the first time I saw it, last time I saw it, every time I've seen it in between, and who on my team has seen that same thing. This was a common moment for me personally when I was doing analysis, where we'd get what we called deja vu moments. I'd look at something, say, oh man, I swear I saw it before. Why does it look so familiar? And then I'd lose time searching my notes, searching the internet, searching sources to get that context. And with that, I'm going to dive into a very abbreviated demo, again, seeding the system with some of this source analytics, some of this telemetry data. And so the first thing I'm going to do is actually going to run a search on a CVE. I'm going to pull up Polarity here. And so from this search here, I can take and I can copy CVE, and in its most basic form, I can actually paste it into the Polarity overlay window here. I can run a search, very much just using a search bar, pasting it in, and running a search. That's one way I can interact and use Polarity. The second way I can do it is with this software here that's running as desktop software as an overlay. And so from here, I can take and go into the platform itself, and you'll notice that it'll actually draw a highlight on the screen and provide awareness as well. That's the second way, is kind of giving me that awareness. So as I go through, and again, I'm trying to do twofold here, give a short demo and show use cases of Polarity, show these highlights, show the ability to get context brought into this overlay window while also seeding the system with data. So I'm going to click through, go from XOR SOAR platform here, showing searches on file hashes there, into an alert here within US CERT. And I'm going to run a search on a whole bunch of IP addresses here. So I'm going to say, hey, Polarity, analyze all these IPs for me. This is going to seed a whole bunch of data into the platform. But what you'll notice here is simultaneously while I ran that search, not only is it giving me the highlights and context, but it's kicking off probably 800, 900 searches just ran in that moment. You saw it pause there for about 5-10 seconds. And it just ran those searches. It gives me the context. I have mandate data coming back. I have US CERT, which obviously I'm going to use site. I have information from Cortex, from Phantom, Alien Vault, Virus Total, all getting streamed into this window here. And for any of these, I can pivot in, click between sources, and get a sense for what's available to me, get that context back to the analyst. I'm going to do the same with some file hashes here, again, seeding the system. And in a moment, we'll hand it over to Joe to show what we can do with all this data. So there I just ran, again, probably close to 1,000 searches on the file hashes. And then we'll scroll through some Splunk data here. Polarity will recognize and highlight in line. As I scroll through, it's running searches on the back end. I can mouse over these searches, these indicators or IPs here. Run a second order search. It's going to run a whole bunch of searches there. And just a couple more here. I'm going to select the area of the screen and say, hey, analyze this area. Again, it's going to run probably almost 100 searches per IP. Do the same thing in Wireshark because we know analysts use all different tools. You never know what they're going to use. Never know when you're going to have to pivot out of your orchestration platform or your SIM. All right. And I guess PowerShell, one more, why not? We'll scroll through this one. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Joe Miller to talk about how we can use this data now for identification of sources that are valuable to a given team or analyst.
Yeah. Hello all, Joe Miller here. Polarity, run product for the team. Bear with me a minute here while we do the fun Zoom switching of sharing screens. Okay, and hopefully everybody can see my screen. Paul, can you see it?
Yes, we got it.
All right, cool. So to start, we're just going to kind of take a quick step back here, talk about what telemetry is a little bit, how you can set it up, how you can enable it on your Polarity server, and then we'll kind of jump through what we can do with it and how to look at those dashboards. So to start, Polarity telemetry or source analytics, as we're calling it now, is essentially the information that Polarity collects when we're running these searches and kind of looking at the information from a user aspect or an analyst aspect, right? So the source analytics is essentially the combination of all that data on the back end. And right now, it is enabled through our logs. We have an environment variable. You can go into, you can set this one variable inside the environment variable, restart the server, and you'll start seeing this information be populated on the server, and then you can do something with that data. To start, it is off by default, so it is not enabled for folks that are using Polarity. There's different levels to the logging as well. So depending on what you want to log, depending on the sensitivity of the information you might be looking at, there's different kind of levels to the data. There's a minimal level, which is you get when a search was run, what integration was looked up, if there was a result, if that result came from a cache, and how they ran that search, right? If the search was run in an on-demand mode, meaning it was done with our shortcut key or done through a search and web search, or it was run in a recognition mode from Polarity, which is, as Paul was showing you earlier, our focus mode or highlight mode or our stream mode. And then we have our info level, which is also everything that's contained in minimal, but then you add the entity types that are there. If it's an IP, if it's a file hash, if it's a CVE, and you also have the process. And then finally, the highest level is entity logging. That's what we call verbose. There you have what entity was searched, who searched it, and then also you get kind of what window that search was done on, which we'll cover that a little bit more in depth in another webinar. But there you can do some really kind of neat analyst workflow type analysis of the information. So that's the type of data that we collect. on our source analytics. Like I said, it is an environment variable. You just add that one line there and you set it to whatever, whatever level of logging you want to log the data. We of course recommend verbose. It is your information. There you can do some really neat things, the entities and window information. And with that, so since it is kind of just logging, you can take the data and put it anywhere to do analytics on it. Today, we're going to be covering Splunk and Elasticsearch. We have documentation and how to configure it with Splunk, how to configure it with Elasticsearch. Here, this is walking through Splunk and also kind of cover Elasticsearch as well. But really, you can take this data and push it anywhere. It doesn't have to be Splunk or Elasticsearch. It could be any type of SIM, any type of logging system where you can then take it and do analysis on it. So really just depends on your workflow and your use cases. Like I said before, this is the data format that it comes in. It's all JSON that gets stored on the logging level. It's fairly easy to parse. Most systems will be able to parse this data fairly simply. You just specify the indexes that you're trying to push the information to. But this is just an example, right? Like I said, if there's information about it, how that search was done, what integration that search was ran on, the entity type, if it was a custom entity type, which is you can build custom regexes with different integrations, or if it was just a regular entity type like IP, all the different ones that it hit on, and then you can see the entity, the user, and then when that search was run. So that's kind of, again, just an overview of the data. And then here, just going to cover this really fast, but to push the information from Splunk is all you need to do is add a Splunk forwarder to your Polarity server. There's a lot of documentation that's out there. We have a document here that I'm walking through now. If you are a current customer or soon to be a future one, we can send this to you. And of course, we'll jump on a call, walk you through setting all this up. But essentially, you set up a Splunk forwarder, run through a few commands, make for sure that that the Splunk forwarder is there, stuff is enabled correctly, and data will start flowing into the indexes that you specify inside Splunk. And then when it comes to data models, you want to make sure that you have specific data models set up. This allows you to do different types of analytics. We're going to be covering kind of the results piece today that you see here, that sources of information. That's kind of what we're going to be covering today. In the future, we'll talk about some other ones, but making sure the data models are there is the next kind of step in setting it up, and then setting up the dashboard. For Splunk and Elasticsearch, we do have default dashboards that we can send folks. Splunk is just an XML, I believe Elasticsearch is as well. So fairly simple to just kind of have a base up and running, so you can then start analyzing and looking at all the information in Polarity and seeing the source analytics. And then I'll jump through and talk through Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch, it's fairly similar. Instead of a Splunk forwarder, right, you're going to be setting up a Logstash instance, or if you're using the new Elasticsearch piece that I do not remember the name of, that would also work to push data to an Elasticsearch instance. Fairly simple configuring a Logstash. You just set up a certain, you basically set up a file on the server that will tell Logstash where to send the data, what indexes to send it to, and then you'll start having that information inside of Elasticsearch. So that is kind of the high level on how to configure, what the data is, and how to move it to Elasticsearch or Splunk. Again, if folks are interested, we can definitely send that information along at a later date. So with that, I am going to jump over into Splunk here and just do a quick refresh, make for sure I have the freshest data. So what you're seeing now is our source analytics dashboard, right? So here we have a lot of different visualizations. The first one that you're going to see is over the past 15 minutes. You can see a lot of those searches that Paul ran initially during the first part of this demo, right? So you can see that over the past 15 minutes, over 6,000 searches were done. We do have some fun like pieces you can play with an ROI calculator here, where depending on how long you think it takes to do a search across all those different data sources, you can change that, right? So right now we have it set to 300, which I think is 5 minutes by default. And so you can kind of change that and adjust and see how many hours you have saved just by doing those searches. So here we've done 6,000 searches in those 15 minutes and saved about 511 hours at 5 minutes search for all those different data sources. I can speak from experience. When I recorded a video earlier, it took me 3.5 minutes to search one IP in 14 systems. So it definitely does take a while, even if you're just copying, pasting it into different tools. So definitely is pretty powerful to see. And you can adjust this, of course. And of course, this is an actual return on investment calculator. So you can see here, based on $125,000 per person, we had saved about $31,000 during that time period based on those 6,000 searches that were ran over the past 15 minutes. That's just kind of a high level, hey, this is what has happened inside of the system. And then here, as we're going down in the dashboard, this is when we're starting to get into that source analytics piece. So you can see all of the different sources that Polarity looked up information in. I believe there are about 40 different integrations. We have about 185 different integrations right now. So it could be 185 sources if you had all of those sources inside of your or at your disposal to search. But you can quickly see here what returned information on what was searched and what didn't return information on what was searched. So you can quickly kind of start to see what integrations are accepting searches, what integrations are more restrictive, like CVE search just looks at CVEs. So it's going to be it's only going to be valuable when you're looking at CVEs, whereas Alien Vault will accept hashes, domains, IPs. That's where kind of the volume of that will be utilized a lot more. So here you can see what returns information, what doesn't return information. You can see Abuse IPDB had 244 positive hits, so it actually returned data 244 times. Alien Vault, you can see here, returned data 116 of them and did not return information 348 of them, but it was looked up during that 15 minutes about 500 times. We did query Alien Vault about 500 times. So you can quickly see what your sources are returning and what's not. Cortex, for example, returned true on all 72 of the different lookups that were performed over the past 15 minutes, et cetera. So you can kind of quickly get an understanding of those different data sources. Paul, from your end, like how would you look at this from like a decision making aspect?
Yeah, so the first disclaimer here is don't read too much into the actual results we're showing. So we're not really trying to compare any vendor or any specific tool for this demo. So this is just demo data, and these are the results of just the integrations I had turned on in the last 15 minutes on this demo server. So disclaimer aside, if I was a leader of a team, I'm getting a clearer understanding of the overlap between the sources that my team uses and their workflows. So as they do their work, how much do the sources overlap with their workflows? And some of these sources are more tool-based, right? They're more tools that they're hitting and running searches on. And other sources here are more data-based, right? They might be things we pay for, subscriptions we pay for, a certain number of API lookups. And as you're looking at this data, you can get an understanding for how much do the data sources I pay for or subscribe to overlap with the workflow of my team.
All right, awesome. So this is just one visualization you can do it, right? This is just looking at this data sources that you have and whether or not they're returning information based on what was searched. You can take this information and splice it a lot of different ways, right? So we can take it and break down the integrations by different types, right? File hashes, IPs, domains, CVEs, email, whatever that file type may be, or not file type, whatever that information is that you're looking at, you can take that and break it down by that data. So you can see here with file hashes, right? Alien Vault returns about 20% of the information, or about 20% of the time returns information on file hashes, right? So you can quickly see the breakdown of that integration based on that type. So again, to go back to what Paul said earlier with the workflow piece, you can really kind of understand what the workflow is of the different analysts, right? You can see where the information is coming from the file hashes, these different types, and then what sources are being utilized for those types. So you can also start to see like gaps in sources. If you don't have as much information on IPs, but you have a lot of information on file hashes, you can start to see those gaps as well. So here's just like I said, just a really neat way to kind of break down and look at those different integrations by data types. Here's another way to look at it. This is just a time series graph running over the different sources that is here. So you can really see when people are doing searches. This is in UTC, so it's not exactly accurate, but you can see when Paul started doing the demo. You can see the volume of searches that was hit when he was talking again. And then again, there's another volume hit on searches, and there hasn't been anything in the past few minutes because we've been reviewing the dashboard here. So you can kind of see the sources over time and really kind of get a view of what's happening over time with individual sources, right? So here we'll go down and I'll try and find Mandiant. So here you can see Mandiant and how Mandiant was utilized over the past 15 minutes. And with that, you can also break it down into individual data sources, right? If you really care about one data source, you can break that data source out and really kind of get an understanding of what's happening search-wise with that data source. So you can see here, this is Mandiant, as I kind of had highlighted here, another kind of very similar view, but this is that true false, which if it returned information or didn't return information piece. So you can kind of really understand your sources, how they're utilized, especially over time. Paul, anything else to add on the kind of overtime piece there from a higher level?
Yeah, I think that one of the key components or capabilities that this gives you is to measure effectiveness of your data, right? As your team's working on an incident, you can say, okay, now let me do a look back, the last 6 hours, the last 8 hours, the last 2 weeks, right? What did the last 2 weeks look like when we were doing this investigation? What sources were informing the team along the way? So yeah, we pulled Mandiant Advantage out here. Again, don't read too much into what we're actually displaying here in terms of the demo data, not a real incident and very much just seeded demo. But you can see in this visualization, green is false, blue is true. And so as I was doing the work, you can see the spikes where I was informed with Mandiant along the way with Mandiant's threat intelligence. If I was intentionally did not form a bake-off here, so just picked one of our partners, one of the vendors here. But if I was trying to compare two vendors over the last incident that we had, I can do the same graph of 2 or 3 or 4 next to one another and get a sense for which data overlapped with that investigation the most, and be smart about my spend. But it's not all about just saying, hey, what do I spend my money on? It's also about filling in those blind spots. So I can be smart about what happened in that whole area where I wasn't informed? Did I have proper coverage? So let's say I had this graph next to another graph with another provider of intel, and where one was low and didn't have any information, the other one had a bunch of information. I can see that I'm being informed along the way. Whereas if they consistently inform and do not have information at the same time, then I have blind spots in the analysis there where those gaps are. So a lot can be done with this data. And one of the core things that we try to live by here is this is your data, right? So this is why we're showing it in Splunk, why we show it in Elastic. If you want to run different analytics or jobs against it, it's your data to do what you want with it and figure out what you want to do with it. And so that's powerful there, all the way to the point of we're not going to show it, I don't think, in this overview, but you can splice it by different teams. How do the data inform different teams? So you can filter, if you choose to, on the users themselves and the teams themselves in terms of who's using what data specifically. Yeah, back over to you, Joe.
Exactly. With that, I'll jump over to Elasticsearch. The beauty about this is that you can push the data anywhere, right? The dashboards look differently, both systems act differently, but let me refresh it here over the past 15 minutes. Data is going to go down a little bit, or looks like we also have some other folks running searches on the server. But you get the same information, right? You can splice the data anyway. This is the same graph that was in Splunk, just slightly differently represented, right? This is not stacked, it's just stacked side by side. So you can see Mandiant, you can see the true falses here with Mandiant over the past 15 minutes. Same exact information, I'm going to show you the same data, but it's just a different source for you to look at it, right? So here you can look at different stuff like indicator types, process over time. You can do some entity visualizations as well, which we're going to cover a lot of this in another webinar. We're going to talk about blind spots and then kind of that workflow piece. But this just kind of gives you an idea that you can really break down the data in any form or fashion, that it is your information and you can push it wherever you want. You can visualize it however you want to visualize it. We just have some basic stuff out of the box to really help kind of hit home, hey, this is kind of what we think is a good starting point for analyzing the information. With that said, I'm going to jump over and do kind of one quick last teaser here. So also, since this information is in Splunk and Elasticsearch, We have these integrations called our telemetry integrations, which we'll probably renamed to source analytics, because that's what we're calling this now. But essentially, you can see what has happened for an entity over time. So here, I'll jump to this CVE, the same CVE that Paul looked up, right? I'm gonna search it in Polarity as well. And here you see these telemetry pieces here. It's this TEL, 1,300 lookups, first seen 2 hours ago, last seen a few seconds ago. So is what this tells me immediately is, hey, this CVE was first seen 2 hours ago and somebody just saw it a few seconds ago. Like, it's definitely something is happening with this all of a sudden. Is it something I need to pay attention to? I can drill into. So again, with our platform, you can just click in and see the information. You can see over the past 6 months, the information that's happened with it. You can drill in, you can just do the last hour, see the total number of searches across all users for this particular entity. You can scroll down and see what of your integrations had hits, what didn't have hits. You can see who was looking it up, because you can see myself and Paul were looking up this this particular CVE. So you can kind of really get that breakdown of information. And this kind of really helps lead into another one of our webinars when we talk about in the future, the blind spot piece. You can see when has seen it, what has seen it, and who has seen it to really help kind of establish for those blind spots in your organization. And it's the same. We have an Elasticsearch source analytics integration. We also have a Splunk source analytics integration. They look very similar. It's based on the same data. They're doing the same searches across the different platforms. So if you have a different source that you are pushing information to, let us know. We can take that. We can build out another source analytics integration with it and kind of help your team with that as well. So just kind of wanted to showcase another side to the source analytics that might not be kind of as knowable just looking at these dashboards. We can also bring the information to the analysts. And that kind of wraps it up and teases some of our next webinars. We're looking forward to kind of talking about source analytics again in the future, talking about those workflows and blind spots. And Paul, kind of turn it back over to you to wrap things up.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Appreciate the overview here and appreciate everyone's attendance. Like Joe said, we're going to cover more uses of the telemetry source analytic data in the future. These are use cases that we've seen with our customers or that we've seen ourselves, but we expect that you're going to come up with other use cases as well, as the data is pretty rich and full of different areas for optimization and areas to really gain insights from your team's searches. Right, this is in its most core basic thing. This is the metrics of searches across your entire team. So when you have your team, searching very easily with the touch of a keystroke or in one place or automatically with the various modes, you're able to capture the metrics of those searches themselves and really understand how you're informing the team. So with that, thank you everyone for your attendance and participation. And we'll take a look at any questions that have come in.